Every morning, Brendan Bullock wakes from his nightly terrors and begins his daily battle to survive.
I suffer from intrusive nightmares at night. I suffer from insomnia. I can't sleep unless I'm medicated.
At dawn, he's greeted by his loyal companion boss, who serves as a reminder of the man he used to be.
The Staffordshire Bull Terrier breed is renowned for being bold, fearless and totally reliable, much like I once was.
Brendan starts his day with 200 milligrams of antidepressants. This decorated former New South Wales police officer is strong on the outside but shattered on the inside.
From the onset of my career, I was exposed to extreme acts of violence, suicides and homicides. Each traumatic incident that I witnessed, I shut away in my subconscious mind.
Now, severely disabled by post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a battle just to get out of the house. Even driving to the shops is a major mental challenge.
I'm very hypervigilant. I'm constantly aware of my surroundings and who is around me at the time. I am constantly on the lookout for people following me. I'm very apprehensive about being in public places. They are environments that I consider myself, when in them, to be vulnerable. It's in my nature to be constantly on the lookout for danger.
It was a very different Brendan Bullock who graduated from Goulburn Police Academy in 1999.
The graduation ceremony at Goulburn, way back then, was something very special. From a dad's point of view, I was really pleased for him and proud of what he'd been able to achieve and get to a point of a goal that he'd had for quite some years prior to that.
For me, the job was very satisfying. It gave me an opportunity to help people, to make a difference in someone's life, to investigate crime and to bring perpetrators to justice.
Brendan was a detective in the Terrorism Investigations Squad and surveilled organised crime figures for the Australian Crime Commission. As a frontline officer, he had death threats and was violently assaulted. He attended murders, suicides and horrific traffic accidents. 4 years into the job, it started getting to him, but he couldn't admit it.
I was supposed to be a police officer. I was supposed to be able to deal with trauma, process it and move on.
So is there a stigma attached to putting your hand up and saying, I need help?
I don't think the culture of the New South Wales Police Force allows their members to have the confidence to open up to their superiors and disclose to them that they are feeling psychological effects of everyday stresses that police go through. Yeah.
I could perceive this old school of, get through it, get it done. There just didn't seem to be any debriefing, for these traumatic events that he had to witness and be part of. And in a word, he started to break openly. Emotionally by our phone call conversations. It was very rapidly becoming all too much.
One night in 2011, he went home and never went back on duty after being called to a domestic incident at a house in inner West Sydney.
I arrived at the scene as one of the first response officers there. And I observed a male person in the driveway of the residence in which he was covered in blood. And he disclosed to myself and other officers that he had killed his wife. Yeah. I made my way down the backyard into a flat underneath the house, and it was there that I found a woman who had been hacked to pieces.
Brendan shielded 2 junior constables from the harrowing scene in the flat below. But he couldn't protect himself from what he'd witnessed.
It was the day that I had to be true to myself and accept that I was unable to process and deal with trauma any longer. Yeah.
Did he tell you about that incident?
He did.
What did he say?
He just told me the circumstances of how the call-out came and what he was required to do. He had 2 junior constables under his care that evening, and he went...
For Brendan, the images of the wife mutilated by her husband tipped him over into full-blown mental illness.
Brendan Bullock is one of the worst affected police officers I've seen when I first saw him. But then in terms of the impact that the delays and the litigation process took, I watched his symptoms become significantly exacerbated.
When Brendan Bullock applied for compensation, it marked the start of a 5-year battle with insurers operating on behalf of the New South Wales Police Force.
Police that end up in this situation with PTSD and out of their job, I think have a right to feel that their claims will be handled swiftly, but instead they find the opposite. And their claims are delayed, they're frustrated, and they go through quite lengthy process in getting compensation and insurance claims paid.
Are those delays justified?
No, they're not justified. In my experience, the delays most often are deliberate delays.
Do some police officers simply give up?
Yes, they do. And that's why I think this is a deliberate ploy. Even one police officer giving up his claim is a significant saving for an insurance company.
Brendan was covered by the police's blue ribbon insurance, which entitles officers who are incapacitated to total and permanent disability benefits.
These people aren't fraudulent. These claims aren't fraudulent. These are the very best of the police that I see go out with PTSD. And can I just say that the pattern that occurs almost exclusively with these claimants is that they come in and see me and they spend a significant part of that first conference crying in front of me. And I'm going to suggest to you that fraudulent claimsters would have difficulty or would be extremely good actors to go through that.
Instead of being granted your blue ribbon death and disability payment quickly, what occurred?
A lengthy and intrusive investigation into my disability.
The insurers went to extraordinary lengths to check the veracity of Brendan's claim. Investigators hired by one insurer, MetLife, filmed him on at least 6 occasions at his home, out shopping, and going to the beach with his family. Brendan's lawyers wrote to MetLife saying, "We ask that no surveillance is conducted on our client," adding, "In 2006 and 2011, our client received death threats. Covert surveillance could exacerbate his condition." Did they stop the surveillance?
No, they didn't.
As the surveillance continued, Brendan rang a MetLife supervisor to ask about his claim for a total and permanent disability benefit.
Mate, I want to talk to you about my claim,
Sure.
my TPD claim.
Sure, okay.
Mate, what's the delay with this TPD claim of mine?
He also wanted to see a psychiatric report commissioned by MetLife.
You should have a copy of that on file.
I believe we do, yes.
Mate, why hasn't that been sent to me or sent to my legal team?
Because unfortunately, First State Superannuation, which is the owner of the policy, forbids us to send medical reports to the claimant themselves.
What MetLife's supervisor didn't reveal was that 7 months earlier, the psychiatrist had advised that Brendan's claim should be accepted. And the psychiatrist warned his condition is severe. He remains badly depressed, if not at risk of suicide.
At that particular time, I was in a state of self-destruction. I was drinking heavily. I was heavily medicated. I was hypervigilant, very aware that I was being watched, yet couldn't understand why this surveillance was continuing.
One day, Brendan snapped and confronted a private eye who was parked in his street.
What are you doing, mate? Sitting outside my house.
I wasn't sitting outside your house.
Hey?
I wasn't sitting outside your house.
Mate, you're sitting outside my house. What are you
I
doing?
wasn't sitting outside your house, mate. I'm allowed to sit in the street. If you've got any problems, call the cops. I was about 30 metres outside yours. I don't know what you're so rattled about.
Beg your pardon?
I don't know what you're so rattled about.
You've been sitting in my fucking street for 3 days, mate.
Yeah?
That's what I'm fucking rattled about. Who you working for?
Nothing to do with you.
Hey?
It's got nothing to do
Who you fucking working for?
Oh, where you go, mate?
You're a fucking idiot, mate. Hey?
The private investigator has told Four Corners that he was conducting surveillance in Brendan's street, but not on Brendan. However, Four Corners has established that on at least 10 occasions after MetLife knew Brendan was suicidal, their investigators continued to surveil him. Do you think all the delays and the surveillance and everything exacerbated his condition?
Without a doubt. He spiralled downwards after that started to happen over that period of time, unbelievably rapidly. And that was when, by phone, the hundreds of hours of phone calls, you know, when he was in a really, really bad way, looking for help, it was really unfair. And I certainly did, and I'm sure Santa did as well. We started to have some grave concerns about him.
9 months after he lodged his disability claim, MetLife told Brendan they wouldn't pay out, as a new insurer had taken over the policy.
The decision that they came to caused me to give up all hope. Their decision to decline my claim pushed me to the edge, and I just couldn't take it anymore.
Brendan attempted to take his own life in his backyard at home. His wife and 2 young daughters found him just in time.
It's something I live with every single day and regret my actions. And I've got to take responsibility for those actions. But what I won't accept is how the insurance companies drove me to a sense of no hope, no positive outlook. Yeah.
They were warned that there was a probability that Brennan would attempt, and they just wanted to sweep it under the carpet. I can't fathom why anybody would want to treat anybody like that. It's madness.
Do you blame them for what occurred?
Absolutely, 100%. I have no doubt about that at all. Without those years of torture, the surveillance, the lack of support and all the above, Brendan wouldn't have got to the point that he did. No doubt.
A common tactic by the police's insurers is to use surveillance to test an officer's claim of PTSD. But most surveillance footage reveals nothing about a person's state of mind. Can the surveillance exacerbate an officer's PTSD?
Oh, very much so. I mean, one of the things that we know is that triggers in the environment will often drive people's symptoms and distress. So if a person is being followed, it very clearly can make them significantly worse because they perceive this threat in their environment that you know, brings back very real things that have happened to them in their career.
Leading psychiatrist Sandy McFarlane has assessed hundreds of officers with PTSD.
As a medical researcher, I have to go and get very detailed consents from people to collect information about their health and welfare. And I really don't understand how, under the privacy legislation, these people can be followed and filmed in that way.
When Greg, a New South Wales cop who asked us not to use his surname, made his claim, he too was filmed. Shopping at the supermarket, walking to his car with a coffee, drinking another coffee in a restaurant. And here, talking on the phone.
I've gone from being a high-ranking commissioned officer in a police force to basically being treated like a criminal. What they say to people is that, well, we don't believe you, and we're going to fight you all the way. And I mean, ultimately, I think what they want to do is just drag it out as long as they can, so you can either give up or go and kill yourself.
In a 17-year career as a New South Wales cop, Greg was exposed to one horrific event after another.
The things police see and do, all police, not just me, almost on a daily basis, are just, you know, now that I look back on them, horrible, horrible things. You know, people who've blown their heads off with shotguns, people who've jumped under trains, you know, you're picking up body parts, you're holding the bodies of dead babies that have died and then dealing with the emotions of the family.
The deaths of children hit Greg particularly hard. He found himself taking it out on his own kids.
I'm pretty overprotective. You know, if one of my kids sort of hurts themselves, I tend to overreact quite badly.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, because of the emotions are so high and inside me, is that it normally ends up turning into anger, which is sort of the reverse of what it should be. So it doesn't make for a very happy family life, if you know what I mean.
It's very confronting for them.
Look, my journey with PTSD has been horrible for them. You know, I have an 8-year-old son who's really only known me as an angry person. And that's not a really good situation for a family. I mean, we're lucky that we still are a family, to be honest.
For Greg, the incident that triggered his spiral into PTSD was the murder of an Indigenous woman, Teresa Binge, in country New South Wales.
Is this the spot?
This is it, Quentin.
Her body was found dumped in a culvert.
I still find it hard. You know, there's an enormous sense of frustration and some guilt, I suppose. She was a 43-year-old woman who was murdered and dragged out here in the middle of nowhere, naked, bashed and displayed. You know, some people may be able to switch off, I don't know, but, you know, I still think about her and what happened today.
13 years on, his failure to bring Teresa's killer to justice still causes Greg intense distress.
How did that investigation start?
Yeah, so it was 2003. Just give me a minute. It's pretty hard to talk about. I can't believe I still get so upset about this.
As the horrors of life on the front line multiplied, so too did Greg's efforts to suppress them.
You just got on with it. Because, I mean, what's the choice? You can't have coppers, you know, in the corner rocking back and forth every time they see a dead body. No work will get done. There are things to be done, so you push them to the side and you get on with it.
But his anger, a dangerous symptom of PTSD, was growing. Finally, he snapped.
It was building and building, the anger. And not just towards crooks, but towards my colleagues. And, you know, it was sort of the case that, you know, you scare yourself. You're walking around with a firearm on your hip and you're that angry and you're that wound up and you don't sort of think that there's any out. So it's not a good place to be if you're a cop with a gun on your hip, walking around the streets full of that much anger. It's just not safe.
He came home and he was punching holes in the wall, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah, it was shocking. It was confronting. A man that I saw as someone who was strong, very capable, very intelligent, I was so proud of him. Brought down to a level of being not in control of his emotions. It was upsetting. It was devastating.
After he put his claim in, Greg and his family were followed and filmed.
To learn that, you know, for 80 hours, some guy in a car with a camera followed me around and took photos of me, followed my wife, took pictures of my kids at the beach, is absolutely humiliating.
I don't see how it's lawful to film children without parents' express permission. When it comes to children, it's not right. And Greg and our family does not deserve to be treated that way.
Greg's last day on duty was 6 years ago, but even now, he and Kylie suspect they're still being surveilled in relation to a further claim.
It's not helping Greg. He's scared to go out in case he's being followed. It can happen at any day, at any time. We've recently had a car sitting out the front taking photographs. We've got CCTV footage of it. We have cameras around our house. We have 6-foot walls to try and keep some privacy. But still they persist.
Greg has even closed down his Facebook account after investigators hired by one insurer, Employers Mutual, started spying on his posts. The investigators captured and kept more than 13,000 items from Greg's Facebook account. But they insist we did not breach privacy legislation in our data collection activity.
But the desktop surveillance is something that we saw commence approximately 18 months ago, and these are private investigation companies retained by the insurers and the police force to basically monitor and collect data on social media about these claimants.
How intrusive is it?
Extremely intrusive. And I must say, not only intrusive, but in my opinion, the actions of some of these investigators are illegal.
In what sense?
Well, in the sense that social media is important for many ex-police. It is the only way that they socialise, if you like, and they have high security settings. Now, the law says, Section 308H, that anyone who breaches a security setting on a computer system is committing an offence. In the desktop inquiries I've seen, that's occurred. I'm instructed that my clients have had very high security settings and they've been breached.
Greg has finally won a settlement for total and permanent disability, but his battle with EML is continuing. He blames the insurer's tactics for damaging his chances of recovery.
Here I was trying to get my health back, mental, physical, everything, keep my family together, and all they were doing was tearing it apart. And, it still continues today.
In my view, there's an enormous conflict of interest for the insurers. They're about saving money and about profits. And I think that potentially, at times, drives what I would see as being unethical behaviour and not understanding that they're actually part of a health and welfare system where an equal concern needs to be about providing people with the care and compensation and income maintenance for people who have genuinely been injured in the course of a public service.
In Victoria, psychologist Tony McHugh has helped police and military veterans recover from trauma. Surprisingly, he says, it isn't war veterans who suffer the greatest psychological damage.
Police are the most traumatised group in the community. We know this because of exposure to police stories. We know this from the limited research that is done. Over a 20-year career, police will see many, many badly injured and deceased people, way in excess of what one would normally see in a military career.
As many people are developing the disorder as have it at the current time. So we're really talking there about 20% of the police forces around Australia have got a group of people who are at significant risk in terms of their mental health.
So 1 in 5 police officers around Australia either have or could develop PTSD?
Yes, that would be a reasonable estimate.
What effect can that have on their ability to do the job?
I think that's really the critical issue that the public needs to be interested in. There are a number of ways that an officer is, I think, a risk to themselves and to the community.
In Victoria, the scale of the problem has been painfully exposed by a spate of police suicides. 35 serving officers have taken their own lives since 1995, including 4 this year alone.
What we know is that suicide overlaps enormously with mental health problems. And if we have undiagnosed mental health problems in exposed populations like the military or police, then it's likely that there's going to be a greater number of suicides. The systems haven't done well enough in looking at this, and the sooner the number of suicides can be reduced, hopefully to practically zero, the better.
As with many police, I've had colleagues that have, at the extreme end of mental health trauma, have taken their lives. And so I've felt that personally, and it's had an impact on me personally. So something that I'm very much personally committed to as a priority for Victoria Police to get right and improve in.
Last year, Police Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton ordered a review into the mental health and well-being of officers in Victoria. It concluded that the culture must change from the top down.
It actually had some strong recommendations for us, telling us that we hadn't been providing the necessary leadership around these issues. Our managers weren't sufficiently skilled in mental health management. They weren't skilled enough in terms of knowing what to do to provide adequate support, and weren't interventionist enough in relation to reaching in, looking for signs of trouble and difficulty with our staff. We recognise it as an issue. The next step is to actually deal with it as an issue.
Rob Bailey is a survivor of the infamous Russell Street bombing in Melbourne 30 years ago. He counsels other officers with PTSD who he believes the system has failed.
I often been asked by professionals to go and visit police who are in poor situations, some that are serving members and some that are retired police, from professional people, and they're in a bad way. They're in a bad way and they feel like they've been abandoned.
It's a terrible waste of talent as well, isn't it?
It is, and in dealing with the retired police, it's really, really sad to see some of these people who headed up major divisions in the Victoria Police that are now retired, sitting there drinking a slab of beer and a cask of wine every day.
Glenn Kite has only just left the force after a long and distinguished career. When he worked in internal affairs, he helped investigate the suicides of fellow officers. He says the need for change is now urgent.
How about getting him some treatment rather than knocking them back? Because I'm telling you now, there will be more and more of this happen. And how many police members have to resign, retire, suicide, before they actually sit there and go, oh, okay, all right, we're going to acknowledge this problem. It's huge, and it's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse.
After dealing with a number of police suicides, Glenn too developed PTSD. And like many others, he didn't get the help he needed. When you went back to VicPol and said, I have PTSD, did they accept that?
No. You're asking for help, but then when you say, well, how do I get it? They say no. And when you get a refusal, it's like they dismiss that you've got no issue at all. And then when that happens, what do you do then?
For the psychiatrists who treat police officers like Glenn, early intervention can make the difference between keeping an officer in the job and throwing him on the scrap heap.
All the evidence is that that's where we need to go. And one of the challenges is that we're dealing with a culture of people who tend to deny their own welfare and ignore their own suffering. I mean, often you have to do that in extreme circumstances to function. So they're not an easy group to get up, to take up the opportunities for early intervention, but I think that requires a very big cultural shift and a whole program of education.
My particular hope is that we will get earlier treatment interventions. That's a win for everyone. It's a win for the force, it's a win for the officer, and it's even a win for the work cover system. Earlier intervention prevents the growth of mental ill health.
How helpful or unhelpful in all of this are the insurers?
The insurers have an incredibly important role to play, and my view is that they don't play it well enough at times. There's data that talks about the number of cases that are rejected, and the number is way too high.
The trouble is that so often these organisations see this as simply a problem of compensation. This is not just a problem of compensation. It's about how, humankind can only tolerate so much reality.
Tony Crowley joined the South Australian Police Force when he was 16 years old. He devoted his whole working life to the job and left a broken man.
Tony's story is one that's very typical of police officers. He went in enthused, energetic, hoping that he could do some good for the community. And really from a fairly early age, he was exposed to some pretty horrific situations.
Shotgun blast to the head, people hanging from their sheds, people gassing themselves in their cars, people gassing themselves with their families in forests in their cars. Murder suicides.
Tony himself personifies the police's failure to deal with mental illness and what can happen to an officer on duty when early treatment isn't given and post-traumatic stress disorder goes unchecked.
My temper wouldn't just hover around 0 to 10, it would go from 0 to 100 at a situation. If things weren't working at work properly, instead of just complaining or fixing, I'd break it. I'd put my fist through it.
Sandy McFarlane is Tony's treating psychiatrist.
He was a man who had always been very willing to walk forward towards danger, but that takes its toll, and there comes a point when he gets into those situations, he begins to lose control of himself.
Andrew Mark Norrie was arrested last Friday near Mount Gambier.
After surviving a gunfight with a notorious serial killer, Tony was ordered back on duty that same night.
In court today, Norrie offered no reason.
I took from that many things. Culture, man up. If you're tired, stiff shit. And if you think you're stressed out, also stiff shit. You're going to come to work. And don't even think about going sick. Just brutal words and brutal attitude. That's probably the closest to counselling I ever got in my life. And that is a fact.
Tony Crowley experienced an unending series of horrors. As the images piled one on top of another, so too did the symptoms of PTSD. Nightmares, flashbacks, insomnia, suicidal thoughts, and a growing, dangerous anger.
If there was a huge fight on, I wanted to be straight there. I wanted to be amongst it. If there was a weapon involved, if there was a gun involved, I don't know what I was thinking. But I wanted to be the first there. I wanted to be involved.
The more an officer becomes traumatised by the job, they become increasingly worried as they approach a dangerous situation. And one of the emotions that can override fear is aggression.
At a meeting one day, Tony lost control and his anger boiled over when he thought his boss was being rude.
And I snapped. And I remember clenching and shaking and I had thoughts of punching him. I was going to punch him. I called a train and went home. And Anne come home from work. And I just said, I think my days are numbered. This happened today at work and I'm going to hurt and kill someone. And this is the end of my career. And I couldn't see myself coming back out of that ever. So that was my final straw.
Tony left the force and lodged an insurance claim, but his troubles didn't end there. The South Australian police wanted him to return to work and sent him for an assessment with a psychiatrist they'd hired.
My temper was at the 100%. And it embarrasses me to say this. There was a spare chair sitting next to me and I pictured it and I was going through the motions of throwing that chair through the 30th story window of Westpac House and him following it.
Tony now lives off his police pension and a meagre award of $65,000 to fund his lifelong medication and treatment for PTSD.
I had so much qualifications and I offered training to so many people. They couldn't use me for any of those. There's something wrong with them. It's bad to the core. And where do you start? I don't know. Recognition, I suppose, is about the start of it.
It seems like such a waste of human capital to have highly trained officers ending up severely disabled and even suicidal. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think it's a tragedy that the government ultimately doesn't sit back and look at the evidence and see that these are occupations that carry with them a significant risk to the health and welfare of people who voluntarily go into these roles. And I think the governments have actually negated their responsibility to protect people who serve the community. And I think have put the bar too high in terms of long-term compensation for officers.
When you disengage from the police force, there's very, very little dignity. There's almost none. to the point where you are really treated like a criminal. The very criminals I used to lock up. So when they follow me around like a criminal or follow my wife and kids and take photos of them, that's the stuff I used to do to people who are doing armed robberies. Now, you think, well, what have I done to deserve that?
After 4 years, Brendan Bullock's claim for total and permanent disability benefits was finally accepted. But his life now is a far cry from the day he graduated.
It's left a gaping hole in him. And he is really, really sorry that it's come to this. He misses it.
I struggle with it every day. I have lost a career that I loved. I lost a marriage. It's broken me.
Given how much we ask of our police, is it too much to expect that we should take proper care of them when they need it most? You can find statements from the New South Wales Police and insurers on our website. Next week, man on a wire.